failing the Luna trial intentionally. Yet the rival Alpha saw through her plan and claimed her. The air was thick with tension as the pack gathered in a circle, eyes fixed on the center of the clearing. This night, the Luna trial would begin. Elijah stood at the edge of the arena, her heart a steady drumbeat in her chest. Her dark hair swirled in the breeze and her pale skin seemed to glow in the moonlight. She was beautiful, no doubt, a woman of strength and grace. But tonight, beauty and grace were not her allies. Tonight she was here to fail. The Luna trial was an ancient rite, held every generation to determine who would be chosen as the mate of the Alpha King. The challenge was simple yet terrifying. Face a series of trials designed to test one's strength, intelligence, and heart. The winner would be declared the Alpha's Luna, a title that brought unimaginable power, but also unrelenting responsibility. Elijah didn't want that power. She didn't want the title. She didn't want the burden of being a Luna. All she wanted was freedom, freedom from the shackles of a fate she never asked for. The whispers of the pack's elders floated in the air like shadows. "She's the one," they murmured. "The Alpha's true mate. It's written in the stars." But Elijah knew better. She had spent years preparing for this moment, knowing that the only way to escape the curse of being bound to the Alpha was to fail the trial. If she could not prove herself worthy, if she stumbled at every test, they would reject her. She would be free to leave the pack and live her life, unburdened by the weight of their expectations. But there was one problem. She didn't account for Kairos. Her gaze flicked to him, standing among the other pack leaders. Kairos, the rival Alpha. A man as fierce as he was intelligent. His eyes, cold and calculating, met hers across the arena. He hadn't taken his eyes off her all night. Kairos had always been a thorn in her side, a shadow lurking just behind her every decision. He knew things about her that no one else did. He understood her pain, her fear, her reluctance to accept her fate. And worst of all, he wasn't fooled by her carefully constructed mask. Tonight, he would watch her fail. He would see her struggles, her deliberate missteps. He would be the one to expose her weakness. And that was exactly what she wanted. The first trial began. Elijah stepped forward, her feet sinking into the soft earth of the arena. The air around her shifted as magic crackled in the atmosphere. She could feel the ancient power of the trial, a force that had tested countless others before her. But tonight, she would fail it on purpose. The trial was a test of strength, a challenge against a beast summoned by the pack's elders. The creature emerged from the shadows, a massive black wolf with glowing red eyes. Its muscles rippled beneath its fur, and its fangs gleamed like daggers in the moonlight. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the fight to begin. Elijah took a deep breath, forcing herself to steady her nerves. She had trained for this. She knew how to defeat this creature. But tonight, she wasn't here to win. The wolf lunged toward her, its jaws snapping, but Elijah did not move. She could have dodged, could have fought back. But instead, she allowed the beast to come closer. At the last moment, she raised her hand, releasing a pulse of magic that should have sent the creature flying back. But her magic faltered. It was weak, controlled, not the full strength she was capable of. The wolf's teeth sank into her arm, its claws raking across her skin. Pain shot through her body, but she didn't flinch. She allowed the wound, allowed the blood to spill from her, knowing that this failure would be enough to end the trial. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others murmuring in disbelief. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that this was her choice. This was the price she had to pay. The creature finally released her, backing away as the magic in the arena began to shift. The elders exchanged glances, their disappointment palpable. Elijah could see the judgment in their eyes. It was enough. She staggered back, clutching her bleeding arm, and knelt before the Alpha King. His gaze was unwavering, a mix of disappointment and curiosity in his eyes. "You have failed," he said, his voice cold and stern. Elijah nodded, her throat tight. She knew this was the moment. The moment that would set her free. "I failed," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. But as she looked up, she saw Kairos standing at the edge of the circle, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. The rival Alpha was the last person she wanted to see right now. Kairos stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "That's not how this works, Elijah," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You don't fail this trial. You don't just walk away from your destiny." She looked at him, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I'm not your Luna," she snapped. "I never was. You can't make me accept a role I don't want." But Kairos didn't back down. Instead, he moved closer, his presence towering over her like a storm cloud. His eyes softened, but his words were sharp. "You think you're fooling anyone. You think your failure was intentional." His gaze swept over her, taking in her bleeding arm, the disheveled hair, the tension in her posture. "I saw through you, Elijah. You wanted to fail. But you can't escape what's already been written." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. She had tried so hard to hide the truth, to keep her plans secret. But Kairos was different. He saw things others didn't. He understood her better than she understood herself. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "I don't want this, I don't want you." Kairos's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "That's exactly why you're mine, because you want to run, but you can't escape this. You're bound to me whether you like it or not." Her chest tightened, her breath quickening. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The words he spoke were like chains wrapping around her, pulling her closer to him. No matter how hard she tried to fight it, she could feel the bond forming between them. The curse. Before she could respond, the Alpha King raised his hand, signaling the end of the trial. The elders murmured among themselves, some disappointed, others intrigued. But Elijah didn't hear them. She only heard Kairos's voice echoing in her mind. "You'll never be free, Elijah. Not from me, not from this." The moon had risen high into the sky, its cold light reflecting off the stone walls of the castle. The wind howled through the cracks, a reminder of the storm that had begun brewing outside. Inside, the atmosphere was no less tense. Elijah stood in the grand hall of the Alpha King's castle, her arms still throbbing from the injury she'd sustained during the trial. But the pain wasn't what worried her. What kept her awake, restless, was Kairos. The rival Alpha's eyes were on her, always on her. His gaze had followed her throughout the trial, and now, even as she tried to slip into the shadows of the hall, she could feel it, that unshakable presence. It was like he was always a step behind her, lurking, watching. She couldn't escape him. No matter where she went, he was there, and it drove her mad. The trial had been a failure as she'd planned. She had stumbled, allowed herself to be injured, and fumbled the test of strength in front of the entire pack. She had seen the disappointment in the eyes of the elders and the Alpha King, and that had been enough. But it hadn't been enough for Kairos. The man who had once been her ally in the pack had become her greatest obstacle. No one else saw through her plan, not like he did. He knew she hadn't truly failed. He knew she had been trying to run. But why? Why had he chosen to pursue her instead of letting her slip away into obscurity? Why did he care so much about a woman who so obviously didn't want him? Elijah glanced over her shoulder, her heart skipping a beat when she saw him again. Kairos was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, his dark eyes never leaving her. He was impossibly tall, his presence commanding, and yet there was something about him that was undeniably magnetic. Every step he took towards her felt like the earth itself was pulling her toward him, as if some invisible force had already decided that they were meant to collide. "You can't hide forever," his voice broke through her thoughts, low and steady, but with a tinge of something dangerous beneath it. Elijah clenched her fists. She didn't want to listen. She didn't want to engage with him, but it was impossible to ignore him. He was the rival Alpha, a man whose power rivaled that of the Alpha King himself. He was intelligent, manipulative, and cold. And now he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between determination and obsession. "I'm not hiding," she said, her voice sharp, though she could feel the tremor in her hands betraying her. Kairos smirked, uncrossing his arms and stepping forward. His gaze softened, but only slightly. "You're running. You've always been running, Elijah. From your past, from your destiny, from the curse that binds us together. But no matter how fast you run, you'll never outrun it." Elijah's heart hammered in her chest. She hated the way he spoke, like he knew her better than anyone else, like he could see through all her layers and expose every hidden fear she had buried deep inside. "You don't know me," she said, her voice steadier now, but the words felt hollow, as though she were trying to convince herself more than him. "You don't understand why I did it." "Oh, I understand perfectly." His voice was quiet now, but there was a weight in it, a depth that sent a shiver down her spine. "You think you're not worthy of this, of me, of the pack, of the Luna title, but you are, and that's exactly why you're afraid. Because deep down, you know it." Elijah took a step back, suddenly overwhelmed. He was right. She had spent her entire life running from the idea that she was destined for something bigger than herself. She had always felt unworthy, always felt that the weight of being a Luna would crush her. But it wasn't just the title that terrified her. It was the man who would be her mate, Kairos. She shook her head, trying to rid herself of the thoughts swirling in her mind. She couldn't let herself be weak. She couldn't let herself be swayed by him. "I'm not your Luna," she said, more firmly this time, even though part of her trembled at the idea of rejecting him. "I don't want to be." Kairos's eyes darkened, but instead of anger there was something else, something almost pitying. He stepped closer to her, the space between them narrowing until they were standing only a few inches apart. "You're lying," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "You're scared, and that's why you're pushing me away." Elijah froze, her pulse racing. She had to get away. She had to break free of this suffocating connection between them, this magnetic pull that she couldn't explain. But she couldn't escape him. Not now. Not when he was so close. Kairos reached out, his fingers brushing against her uninjured arm, a simple touch, but it felt like an electric shock. "You can't run forever," he repeated, his voice softer now, more intimate. "You don't want to, you think you do, but you don't." His words were like a spell, weaving into her thoughts, making her question everything. What if he was right? What if she had been running from herself all along? "No," Elijah whispered, taking a shaky breath, pulling her arm back. "I don't want this. I don't want you." But the moment the words left her lips, she knew they weren't true. Because deep down, despite everything, despite all her resistance, she couldn't deny that there was something between them. Something she couldn't ignore. Kairos seemed to sense her inner turmoil, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took another step forward. "You're not fooling anyone, Elijah, least of all me." He reached up, his hand brushing a lock of hair from her face, his fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The touch was gentle, but it carried a promise she wasn't sure she could resist. "You can't escape this," he said again, his voice low and insistent. "You can't escape me." Elijah's breath hitched in her throat as she looked into his eyes, unable to look away. She had always thought she could outsmart fate, but now, standing here with him, she was beginning to wonder if there was no escape at all. The night felt heavier than ever before. The storm outside raged on, the howling wind slamming against the castle walls like an ancient creature in pain. Inside, the atmosphere was no less suffocating, but now it was a different kind of pressure. Elijah had tried to escape the pull between her and Kairos, but no matter where she went, he was always there, lurking in the shadows. She could feel his presence as she walked through the dimly lit corridors of the castle, her footsteps echoing in the cold stone halls. The night was too quiet, too still, and it made her mind race. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier, about the way his words had sunk into her soul, how his touch had ignited something inside her that she didn't want to acknowledge. "You can't run forever." She couldn't shake those words. They kept repeating in her head as if they had become a part of her own thoughts, and she hated it. She hated the way he made her feel, the way he saw through her every defense. Elijah finally reached her chambers, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. She leaned against it for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The room was dark, but the moonlight streamed through the narrow window, casting long shadows across the floor. She moved to the bed, sitting down slowly, her mind still spinning. She had failed the Luna trial. She had done exactly what she planned to do, but the problem was she hadn't expected Kairos to see through her. Her hand went to the wound on her arm, now dressed in a makeshift bandage, and she winced at the sharp sting of it. She hadn't fought back when the beast had attacked. She had let it hurt her, hoping the failure would be enough to make them see she wasn't fit to be their Luna. But now it felt pointless. All her efforts had been in vain. Kairos had exposed her, and now she was trapped. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her heart skipped. She knew who it was before the sound of footsteps even reached her ears. Kairos. She didn't answer at first, hoping he would leave. But when the knock came again, louder this time, she sighed and stood, moving to the door. Opening it, she was met with the sight of him standing in the dim corridor, his arms crossed, his eyes as intense as ever. The storm outside raged louder, but the air between them was thick with something else. "You're avoiding me," he said simply, his voice low and almost mocking. Elijah didn't step back. "I'm not avoiding you, I just don't want to talk to you." His lips quirked into a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You can't run from this. You can't run from me." She wanted to slam the door in his face, but something in her couldn't bring herself to do it. His words, the way he always seemed to know what she was thinking, it was unnerving. It made her feel exposed, vulnerable in ways she wasn't ready to admit. "You're wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze softening just a fraction. "You don't understand. The curse doesn't work like that. You can't run from it forever." The mention of the curse made her pulse race, and a knot formed in her stomach. "What curse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. She had heard the whispers, the old legends of the curse that had plagued her bloodline for generations. The curse that tied her fate to the rival Alpha. "The curse that binds us," he said softly, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. His presence filled the space, and Elijah instinctively took a step back, though she didn't want to. "This has always been your destiny," he continued, his voice steady, like he was reciting something that had been engraved into his mind. "The Luna of the pack, my mate. You've been running from it, but it's not something you can escape. It's woven into your very blood." Elijah shook her head, the words stirring something deep inside her. "I don't want this. I don't want you. You can't make me accept it." Kairos stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't need to make you accept it," he said quietly. "The curse will make you accept it. The bond between us is already formed, whether you recognize it or not." His words struck her like a blow. The curse, the bond. She had always known, deep down, that there was something about her bloodline, something that tied her to Kairos, but hearing him say it out loud made it too real, too undeniable. "What if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound strong. "What happens then?" His gaze softened, a flicker of something in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. "You can refuse all you want," he said, "but it won't change what is. It won't change the truth." The silence between them grew heavy, and Elijah felt her chest tighten, as if the weight of the words was suffocating her. She had always thought she could escape it, that if she tried hard enough, she could outrun the curse. But now, standing in front of Kairos, she realized how foolish that idea had been. "You think I want this," she whispered. "I don't. I never did." "I know," Kairos said quietly, his voice almost tender. "But it doesn't matter what you want. The bond is there. It's been there for longer than you can remember, and no matter how hard you try to fight it, it will pull you back." Elijah swallowed, her throat dry. "What if I don't want to be with you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What if I want nothing to do with you?" Kairos's eyes darkened, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of pain in them, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "You don't have to want it, Elijah," he said softly. "You don't have to want me. But the truth is, we're bound together. This is who we are. And whether you accept it or not, we will face it together." Elijah's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of anger and fear swirling inside her. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him she didn't care about the curse, that she didn't care about the bond. But the words stuck in her throat, because somewhere deep inside she knew he was right. Kairos stepped back, his expression unreadable. "I won't force you to accept this," he said, though his voice held a quiet certainty. "But I will be here, waiting. When you're ready to face it." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Elijah alone with the growing storm inside her. The door clicked shut behind him, and Elijah sank to her knees, her hands shaking. The words he had spoken echoed in her mind like an unshakable truth she couldn't escape. The curse, the bond, Kairos, the days that followed Kairos's visit passed in a blur. Elijah barely remembered her steps as she walked through the halls of the castle, her mind preoccupied with the words he had spoken. The bond, the curse, the unbreakable connection between them. It all weighed heavily on her, and she could feel it sinking deeper into her soul. Kairos had given her time, space to think, and for that she was thankful. But the silence was suffocating. The tension between them hung in the air like a storm threatening to break. It felt as if every corner of the castle whispered his name, every shadow seemed to call her, and every moment she spent away from him only seemed to pull her closer to a truth she couldn't escape. Elijah had spent years avoiding the reality of her destiny, hoping that if she ran far enough she could escape the curse that bound her. But now, after the trial, after the encounters with Kairos, she was beginning to see the truth. There was no escaping it, not from him. Not from the fate they shared. She stood by the window in her room, looking out at the dark sky as the storm continued to rage outside. The wind howled, and the trees swayed violently in the distance, their shadows flickering like restless spirits. It felt as if the entire world was caught in a struggle, a battle between forces beyond her control, and in the center of it all was her. She had tried so hard to deny it. She had tried to fight it. But now, standing here, she knew that her fate was tied to Kairos's, whether she wanted it or not. The door to her room creaked open and she turned, her breath catching in her throat when she saw him standing there. Kairos. His eyes were dark, intense, and he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching her, as if waiting for her to speak. But Elijah didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to confront the reality of what they were becoming. "You've been avoiding me," Kairos said finally, his voice low and steady. "But avoiding me won't change anything." Elijah clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. "I'm not avoiding you," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I've just been thinking." "And what have you been thinking about?" Kairos asked, stepping into the room, his presence filling the space. His eyes never left hers, the intensity in them almost too much to bear. "I've been thinking about everything," she replied, her heart racing. "About the trial. About the curse, about us." His lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, but there was no malice in it. "I've told you before, Elijah. You can't run from this, from me." "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but that doesn't mean I have to accept it." Kairos stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her. "You don't have to accept it. You don't have to want it, but it doesn't change the truth. We are bound by fate. You've always been destined to be my Luna." "I don't want to be your Luna," she said, her voice breaking as the frustration bubbled up inside her. "I never did." Kairos's expression softened, and for a moment Elijah thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, pain. It was gone too quickly for her to be sure. "You don't have to want it," he said gently, "but you will be." Her heart ached. His words held such certainty, such finality, and deep down she knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier. "I don't know what to do," Elijah said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to accept this, how to accept you." You don't have to know right now, Kairos replied softly. I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm just asking you to stop running. She stared at him, her mind spinning. She wanted to scream at him, tell him she didn't need him, that she didn't need this life. But instead, she found herself taking a step toward him, drawn to him by forces she didn't understand. I'm not running, she whispered, though her heart told a different story. She was running, running from the truth, from the bond between them, from everything she couldn't control. Kairos reached out, his hand gentle as it brushed against her cheek. The touch was like fire burning her skin, but it wasn't pain. It was something else, something deep and consuming. You don't have to run anymore, he said quietly. You don't have to fight it. Elijah closed her eyes, her breath coming faster. What if I can't accept it? What if I can't be what you want me to be? You already are, Kairos whispered, his voice soft and soothing. You don't have to try to be anything else. You just have to be yourself. The Luna will come in time. Elijah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had never felt so lost, so small. But in Kairos's presence there was a strange sense of calm, a pull she couldn't explain. She wanted to fight it. She wanted to tell him no, to run far away and never look back. But something inside her said otherwise. Something inside her was telling her that maybe, just maybe, this was where she belonged. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kairos took a step back, his hand falling to his side, though the intensity in his eyes never wavered. Now, he said, we face what's coming together. Elijah felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, heavy and inevitable. They would face it together. The bond, the curse, the life they would share. There was no more running. There was no more hiding. She could feel the pull between them stronger than ever. It wasn't just magic. It wasn't just fate. It was something deeper, something undeniable. The curse that had plagued her bloodline for generations was finally coming to a head. And Elijah knew, without a doubt, that her destiny was no longer in her hands. She was no longer in control. But maybe, for the first time, she didn't want to be.